he answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us. And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sinned, but now that you say we see, your sin remains.
Here are some great truths that children have learned. No matter how hard you try, you cannot baptize a cat. When your mom is mad at your dad, don't let her brush your hair. Never ask your 3-year-old brother to hold a tomato or an egg. You can't trust dogs to watch your food for you. Don't sneeze when somebody's cutting your hair. School lunches stick to the wall. You can't hide a piece of broccoli in a glass of milk. And here's the best one. Never wear polka dot underwear under white shorts, no matter how cute the underwear is. Remember, I learned a number of other great truths from children while I taught school when I was living in Phoenix. I was a substitute teacher in the Pendergast school system, and it was an eye-opening experience for me on many levels. My days in the classroom were never dull or boring. And one thing I learned was that youngsters have a lot in common with each other. I also learned to expect the same things to happen every day, even though I taught in 13 different schools. For instance, I could count on some students, especially among the younger boys and girls, being bound and determined to tell me all about the terrible things other students were doing. Maria would say, Billy stole the eraser from the end of my pencil and won't give it back. Danielle would scream, Marie is hogging all the pink markers and now I can't color my picture at all. Someone else would yell, Ricky cut mine in front of me. I'm supposed to be the line leader, not him. Actually, I could always count on went on and on. In one classroom, the teacher had posted a large sign on the wall, MYOB, it shouts, mind your own business. And as much as we might try to reinforce that notion, it just doesn't work. And truth be told, it's not just children who are determined to point fingers at each other. We adults do a pretty good job of minding other people's business, too. We love to dish the dirt about folks, whether we know them or not. We're bombarded by stories and gossip that point fingers at other people every day. Whenever we turn on our TVs or log on to the internet or check our Facebook or Twitter accounts, we're confronted with the latest news about people engaging in all sorts of activities, some good, but mostly not so good. And I have to admit that I check out the stories about people's misbehaviors and sometimes enjoy the gossip that's alive and well and flourishing in this world. And whether we admit it or not, it just plain makes us feel good sometimes to know that other people have somehow managed to mess up their lives. Well, today's gospel story is about a man who was born blind. And in those days, in the Mediterranean culture, it was commonly believed that if a person suffered from a disease or a disability from birth, the parents must have done something wrong. So it could have been that the story we heard a few minutes ago may have gone something like this. Samuel, I'm telling you, if I hear one more person ask what I did to cause my son's blindness, I'm going to hit him with my crock pot. The elderly man reached out to stroke his wife's shoulders. Sarah, Sarah, enough, he said. We've been through all of this 100 times. Their son Benjamin was the light of their lives, the child for whom they had hoped for so long. But light was something that had no meaning for him. Benjamin had been born blind. Every day his parents had watched him struggle. Every day they had listened to the people in town ask, what did you do to cause his blindness? Believe me, Samuel and Sarah had racked their brains trying to figure it out. For the life of them, they couldn't imagine what terrible sin they had committed that would make their son, Benjamin, suffer so much. And to make matters worse, no one ever asked how they could help Benjamin. All anyone did was to point their fingers and announce Benjamin and his parents to be sinners. And that very day, it had happened again. A group of men from out of town had seen their son begging by the side of the road, and they had heard one of them ask their leader that old question. All afternoon, Sarah had pondered the answer that she overheard. The leader said, it's not anyone's fault. It's so God's work can be shown through this man's life. Sarah didn't know what that meant, and she had no idea who the man was who spoke such strange words. As Sarah was thinking about all of this, the door burst open and a disheveled man plunged through. He was dripping wet and grasping wildly at everything. At first, Sarah didn't recognize him. Then he turned toward her and she gasped as she gazed into the familiar eyes of her son. Eyes that now returned her gaze. Benjamin, Benjamin, is it really you? Benjamin whooped and hollered as he swung his mother high above him and then gently set her down and hugged her. He was like a child again. The world was brand new to him, bright and wonderful. His father and mother knelt beside him, their hands exploring his face. Benjamin, what happened? Can you really see? He looked up, and for the first time in his life, there were tears in his eyes. I really don't know how it happened. A man, the one they called Jesus, knelt beside me on the road today. He asked me if I wanted to see. Then I felt something cool on my eyelids. It turned out to be mud. He told me to go wash in the pool, and when I pulled my head out of the water, on running wildly, touching everything I could, seeing for the first time. It was incredible. But then people started crowding around me, shouting questions at me. They took me to the Pharisees who started questioning me. It was as though I was on trial. Just then the sound of an angry fist on their door interrupted their reunion. Irate voices from outside called for Sarah and Samuel. They were ordered to appear before the Pharisees. Amazed and confused, they could hardly keep their minds on what they were being asked. It sounded so impossible. Such a miracle. Yes, he is our son, they said. Yes, he was born blind. What did the temple leaders want? Sarah struggled, her anger flushing her cheeks. Samuel laid a restraining hand on her arm. She knew. He didn't have to tell her. They had spent most of their lives trying to find out what they had done to cause their son's blindness. They weren't going to speak now and risk making God's representatives angry. Ask him yourselves, Samuel commented as they left. Sarah leaned heavily on her husband's arm as they left the crowd behind. Did we do the right thing? She asked. What should we have said? Samuel sighed and turned to his wife. For 30 years we've asked that. He said, but only now do I feel that we have truly done something wrong. We both know what the man Jesus did for Benjamin. Why couldn't I say it? You know why, Samuel, said Sarah. You heard their threats. It's been hard for us to fight back the rumors all these years, but now we would have really ended up being outcasts. I just couldn't bear the thought of being thrown out of the synagogue. It would mean no more potluck dinners in the social hall, no calls from friends and neighbors. Sarah and Samuel knew that if they were excommunicated because they believed Jesus to be the Messiah, it would mean they would be shut off from God. Indeed, seeing this Jesus character was very risky business. Samuel whispered, is that all we've learned? Only to fear the God who would grant us such a precious gift, but not to honor his prophet? All this time, I was sure we hadn't failed our son. Now I'm not so sure anymore. You know, no matter how the story is told, it's a story of God's reckless mercy. Reckless, because on top of everything else in the story, the mercy of healing comes on the wrong day. That's one thing that got the Pharisees so riled up. They couldn't, for the life of them, understand how Jesus, who was supposed to be a man of God, could possibly ignore the rule about making mud or anything else on a Sabbath day. It was downright sinful not to follow that rule. The whole thing was just plain ludicrous. This fellow Jesus had to be put in his place where the whole town would be turned upside down. At least the blind man's parents got the point. They had the decency to be afraid and to back down. And another thing, the Pharisees were quick to point out, why would God's mercy reach down to someone like this blind man anyway? Talk about unworthy. Why? He was just about as low as he could go. Reckless mercy. And isn't it a good thing that God's mercy is reckless? This story tells us over and over again that God is reckless when it comes to mercy. And as with most stories in the Bible, there's more here than meets the eye. Sure, we get the picture. Jesus comes along, spits on some dirt, makes mud, smears it on the blind man, and suddenly he can see. Great miracle, Jesus. But did you notice people's reaction to this miracle? There wasn't any jumping for joy. There were no celebrations. No thank gods or hallelujahs. No, indeed. Instead, there were questions, accusations, finger pointing and blaming going on all over the place. No one bothered to ask the man what it felt like to be able to see or whether the light hurt his eyes. Nobody seemed to care about any of that. All that really mattered as far as the good church folk were concerned was that something was wrong. Rules and regulations weren't followed, and somebody had to pay for it. At first, when the man is confronted by the Pharisees, he's pretty timid. Like his parents, he's reluctant to acknowledge the whole thing. But as the questioning continues, the man finds his courage and finally speaks out. The author, Barbara Brown Taylor, puts it this way: this man, a nobody from nowhere who was blind until about 45 minutes ago, had just told the board of elders that they could not see God if God bit them on the nose. And that's just too much for these righteous church leaders. They had to point their fingers at this young man. Get out, you sinner. You were born entirely in sin, and you're trying to teach us. And unlike his parents, the man isn't overly concerned with potluck dinners or keeping his seat at church, and he doesn't seem to see his being branded a heretic as a terrible disgrace. That's because another heretic hears about it and comes to visit. At first, the once blind man doesn't recognize the stranger, but there's something familiar about the voice. When the man is confronted with a question, it doesn't sound like an accusation, but more like an offering from one heretic to another. And in that moment, the once blind man sees the light of life that shines brighter than ever. And I think all of this should make us ask ourselves some questions. When have we been blind? When has God been so close to us that God could have bitten us on the nose, and yet we weren't willing to see God? How many times have we passed judgment, pointed fingers of blame, accused and been unwilling to offer the gift of reckless mercy? It happens to us all. We can become so blinded by our sense of right judgment, or we feel compelled to protect our place in the world, that we withhold our thank gods or hallelujahs when mercy and healing are offered to the unworthy. This miraculous story tells us that everyone can be given the gift of sight, no matter how much we insist on passing blind judgment. God's reckless mercy touches everyone. You know, all of us sinners get to share the joy of God's reckless mercy. May we be wise enough to be part of that wonderful recklessness and have the eyes to see and the hearts to love. Amen.